You're listening to a Comics XF podcast.
X-Men. Get it!
Hey everyone, and welcome to another exciting episode of Battle of the Atom. This is your weekly X-Men podcast where we rank every story from A to Z.
I'm Adam.
And I'm Zach. Adam, how are you today?
I'm good. We're back for our, second episode of 2024. And I think we got a bit of a doozy for our audience today.
For our audience, Adam, we have a bit of a doozy for you and I, friends who like to talk about comic books.
Very true. Very true. Who requested that we talk about this 5-year-old story on this week's episode?
That's a great question. This week's request comes to us, as all requests do, from our Patreon supporters. This one came from Riley Gillard. If you want to be like Riley, you can go over to patreon.com/Battle of the Atom. Reach deep down into your hearts and pocketbooks and toss a couple of coins into our coffers. And what you can do with that is be nice to us and say, you know what? Zach and Adam do so much for this, for my ears every week. I could ask them to talk about something that they will have fun with, and they'll be, making their goofs and their bits and talking about what this weird character is doing these days. We could make them talk about some 60s comic that neither of them will like, but they'll use as a springboard to talk about stuff they actually want to talk about.
Sure.
We could figure out what Chris Claremont comics they haven't covered, because they love those. Extreme doesn't count. Please don't.
That's true.
There's so many things that we enjoy, Adam.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In this case, unfortunately, we have been asked to talk about something that I think Riley thought would be fun to talk about.
Okay. Yeah,
and instead, this is an all bummers episode, folks.
Well, I don't know if it's all bummers, but it's mostly bummers.
There's a disproportionate amount of bummers in this episode.
Yes. What is it, Zach? What have we been tasked with covering this week?
We're talking about the Matt Rosenberg pre-Krakoa Uncanny X-Men run, split into 3 parts.
That is correct.
Uncanny X-Men 11 to 22 and War of Realms X-Men. We're talking about it all, folks.
I think this is a smart way to do this, though, because it would be not great to just do the first half and then talk about them randomly on another episode. Let's just talk about all of it, because
this is like Band-Aid Protocol.
Yeah,
I think.
Rip it off. Rip that Band-Aid off. And, if some arm hair comes with it, so be it. So, you're going to hear some arm hair come off.
Before we get started, I want to just reiterate, Matthew Rosenberg, friend of the show, has been on. He's in fact talked about some of the things he didn't like about this run. And he's a writer that we tend to like. Where do we have Dead Souls?
Love Dead Souls.
Yeah, we have Dead Souls in the top 50. We have Multiple Man.
Love Multiple Man
in the top 100. I like Matthew Rosenberg comics by and large.
What's the furthest place from here? Still a weird, fun universe of random child gangs attacking each other. It's pretty cool.
What's the furthest place from here is pretty darn good. 4 Kids, pretty good. Rosenberg tends to have... Here's what Rosenberg has a really good strength at. Rosenberg has a really good sense of dialogue and sense of character.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of good timing with his dialogue. That works really well. He also tends to step back and let his artists do their thing, especially when he's working with Tyler Boss or others in his creator-owned side. Love that.
Yeah. Unfortunately, he doesn't have the best artists to work with here. And the final result is an X-Men run that I think charitably I could call disliked. This is not only
disliked is the right word.
Yeah, it's not only that people don't like this run. There's a lot of people that hate this run. I think even while it was coming out, it was extremely controversial among X fans.
It was.
So,
not that Twitter was ever a good place, but there's like a 3-month spell between this run starting and the Krakoa stuff starting to get announced. And I don't know if there was a rougher time to be talking to X-Men fans on the internet. Like, it wasn't fun.
Yeah, we've talked about elements of the storyline that's happening in tandem with this, which is the Age of X-Man. And I think we've spoken pretty highly about some of the creative risks that were taken as part of that alternate universe energy. Even if that wasn't perfect, it was doing some things that I think you and I have both agreed are really fascinating and, maybe in the larger scheme of things don't quite shake out, but there were some really amazing things that came out of Age of X-Man that even flowed into what was going on in Krakoa.
Oh yeah, I'm number one Age of X-Man fan, Zach Jenkins, right here.
Yeah, bring on Age of X-Man 2. But unfortunately, because after the first 10 issues of Uncanny X-Men Volume 5 disassembled, or is it disassembled? Disassembled?
Disassembled. It's an Avengers riff, which is a weird way to start,
It's
but
a
I get it.
strange thing to do. You've got the majority of the X-Men off the table. So Rosenberg is left with a limited palette and is, be it through editorial edict or what, he's essentially going to tell what is going to be one of, if not the darkest stories, because that's what he's got left. And it's this sense of desperation and doom and death that is going to be the permeating emotion that is going to go through these issues. It's not the kind of thing that is going to put a smile on most people's faces.
It is not. And I am not a man who is against bummer comics all the time or bummer stories. I read things that make me feel bad sometimes. And my wife is like, why did you do that? And I said, listen, art's complicated. There's a lot to it.
Absolutely right. Like there's so many great movies out there that are just designed to make you cry or what.
I watched, here's what I did, Adam. You'll get a kick out of this. This weekend, I watched The Lighthouse.
Oh, love that.
And I described it to my wife and I said, yeah, it's like I decided that now that I started taking anxiety medication several years ago, that like I missed the high of just being super anxious about everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it gave me that.
You sure chose a good one there, Maybe you follow it up with Uncut Gems and like just get really ramped up.
What, Adam, want me to tell you how I made it worse?
Oh no.
My pharmacy was, well, no, after it I watched The Green Knight like the next day. It was great.
Oh, nice.
Later that day. It was great.
Yeah,
and I watched Men before it. Interesting, not ideal. Great cinematography in it. People talk about the ending of Men and like, oh, there's a human slinky, there's this whole birthing thing. Listen, I have 3 children. My wife experienced the worst of it, but like, listen, ain't nothing that the movie Men is going to show me that I've not lived in life. I'm like, okay, yeah, well, no, that's just fine. No, Adam, here's the worst part. Before I did any of that, my pharmacy ran out of my refill of my anxiety medication. So I was raw dogging those for a little bit.
Whew. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I don't know, man.
Regardless, sometimes I like bummers. Sometimes bummers are fun. This I wouldn't necessarily call fun, though I do think there is some interesting stuff. Specifically, how this starts being Rosenberg on a blank page saying every X-Men story is the same.
Yeah, and this is the last X-Men story. So that is our pitch, right? Is that this is going to be dark. This is going to be the end. We're putting this sort of gravestone on top of the era. And so just so readers know, we're going to start the conversation with the first arc, which is 11 to 16.
11 through 16.
This is forever. And, I think we were just talking off air. Great start, I think, for the most part.
I think issue 11, which is like a triple-sized issue by Rosenberg with Salvador LaRocca, who is the main penciler on this run, as well as with backups with John McCree and Juan and Ramirez.
Mhm.
I think this sells me on the desperation, because what you have to remember is that Cyclops was dead
Yep.
for several years before this. This is the first Cyclops story since IVX.
Mhm.
This is the first Wolverine is with the X-Men story since Wolverine's death several years before then. Like, it is them coming back to life, more or less, and saying, oh, everything's even worse? What are we going to do about it? And I think this comic sells the desperation that, like, you know, every X-Men story is about them being hated and feared and trying to protect that world, and them just continually getting beaten down and broken, and having IVX stuff happen, and having M-Day happen, and having the Mutant Registration Act and Project Wide Awake. All this crap wearing down on them and making them exhausted. This comic gets that through.
Yeah, and I think if there's a criticism to be weighed against Fall of X, it's that there seems to be kind of an underlying cheery disposition to a lot of the conversations and characters, at the same time that there is the threat of global genocide to the mutant race. Whereas this does not spare punches. This is basically suggesting that the mutants have no hope. There has been perfected an anti-mutant vaccine that is going to sterilize people. They're not going to be able
We're going to get to the vaccine later. We're going to get into the vaccine later.
There is no way to make more mutants at the start of this story. We have an anti-mutant person running for president. They're being hunted down, and it seems like every regular person, I don't want to use that, like non-mutant character
mutants aren't real. We can't, you and I can't actually discriminate against mutants, Adam. I just want to be clear. They are fictional.
Yeah, but every human being who's not a mutant is depicted in this story as being deeply, hateful and, spiteful and bigoted. So,
except for Harry, the owner of Harry's Hideaway.
God bless Harry. God bless Harry.
God bless Harry.
So if I want to compliment this, I will say that the idea of Cyclops showing up at sort of like a MAGA rally and shouting out his discontent, and getting into this argument with the crowd and then with Captain America. And it's in very stark relief to what we just saw in, let's say, Fall of the House of X, where Scott didn't even defend himself in court, which I know has been a little bit controversial.
Has it? I don't pay attention to that anymore.
Yeah, I just, it's an interesting contrast. This Cyclops is so beaten down that he can't help but just be furious with the state of the world and be shouting about it. So this goes...
Could you believe, Adam, could you believe that this comic came out in 2019 when probably liberal-leaning people were not at their lowest point in terms of, oh no, everything's going to be terrible, but we're getting there?
It sure is a comic of its time. I think that's pretty accurate.
Very of its time.
Yeah. So that's great. I think that the final sequence in the first issue of, hey, Cyclops is going to get taken out by all of these different random, B-list villains, including like the Reavers and the Purifiers. It kind of is reminiscent of a Furthest Place From Here scene with all the gangs coming in and attacking.
Yes.
And Wolverine showing up and going, he ain't alone. That's a pretty good beat.
That got a pop out of me. What gets a bigger pop out of me is after they beat up everybody, they stand next to each other. These two men, last they talked, hated each other so much.
Mm-hmm.
Wolverine died before Cyclops. Like, he's not even mad about IVX stuff. He's mad about all this other stuff still. You have 5-ish years of these guys just not being friends. No, 10 years, because Schism was in like 2011.
Right.
So you have these guys, the first time in a decade, they see each other, and says, Logan, Scott, all right, let's get to work. That
right.
That's how you end an issue right there. Like, that got me going on this first issue.
Sure. I think we would be remiss if we weren't also talking about the darkest part of this start of the arc, which also involves the suicide of Blindfold. And the way that Rosenberg is telling this story is that every single possible future for Blindfold is so bad that she has no choice left but to take her own life. And I think that there's a certain level of irresponsibility in the way that that was told. I understand why Matt did it. I understand what his intentions were as a storyteller. I don't know that it's in fitting with what the X-Men are usually all about, in general.
I think there's a big tonal shift between Uncanny X-Men Disassembled and then going right into this. Like, it's a lot. I struggle with the Blindfold story just because I fully understand what's happening here. You're showing, hey, this is what this level of depression and anxiety about the future can do to somebody. I get that. I don't know how well that is conveyed in the short page time that it is given for a side character. I feel like that is somewhat of a challenge.
I think it's a form of fridging in terms of how to motivate our main characters that feels very uncomfortable, because there's a version of this entire Rosenberg arc that leans a little bit more into like a dark sense of humor, right? Because there are things
Yeah.
that happen over the course of this that are kind of funny in like a really dark and twisted way that probably would have played better had it not leaned so hard into things like what happens to Blindfold that don't really seem totally in keeping with the. I don't know, it's hard because it's almost wanting the tone to be different, but then Rosenberg has absolutely set what the tone is by doing this to that character and to other characters along the way.
Rosenberg wants to do his fun dialogue because that's the writer he is. But then at the same time, he has been handed the make this the darkest X-Men story,
right,
as the marching orders for this, and that is hard to balance. And I don't think
it is.
that is successfully balanced.
No,
I also want to say, not helping him is Salvador LaRocca doing some of the worst work of his career.
let's get into it.
I mean, we gotta, right? Like that doesn't help any of this.
No, it really doesn't help that the book just looks bad. I was trying to give it a fair shake on a reread and go, okay, maybe this is that and this that, but oh boy, I mean, there is just like some really, his style has changed so dramatically since he came on to comics, and not for the better. He's leaned into something that feels like it wants to be more photorealistic, and it's not good. Proportions are weird, but not in a way that feels complementary to a certain style. Things just don't seem to match up perspective wise. It's just, I don't know. Nothing about it sits right with me.
It's not great. I don't think Rochelle Rosenberg's coloring on this does it any favors at all. It feels like. Do you remember the Ed Brubaker the Extremists? I think it was arc.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like that. Like it's that drab, browny gray, depressing comics that we didn't like. And I do think the photorealistic style is a big hindrance to this entire story because it means that everything hurts and hits a little bit more. Whereas, like the Wolverine Returns story in this that John McCree does is like a parallel story of this. If you get someone with more of a cartoonist eye on this, like McCree, I kind of think some of I think it would balance out the hyper depressingness of everything because it's you are another step removed from the work versus LaRocca that is very much this is as realistic as Salvador LaRocca can get it.
Right. So I think we're in agreement that the art is not great. Where the book goes from here, though, is also just pointedly strange. Cyclops essentially develops a like who's still the living supervillains and foes of the X-Men list. And yet we're going to go get them, but we're not going to kill them. We're going to hide them in the basement of Harry's. And we're going to start with Dark Beast. We're going to run into the MLF, who are being led by Hope. We're going to, we're going to rescue and follow up on the storyline from Dead Souls. So we're going to rescue the New Mutants from ONE.
Not just Dead Souls. This is Matthew Rosenberg saying, okay, well, everything I've done at Marvel, I guess, like, this is my biggest stage. And he knows that Krakoa is coming. He knows that he's not getting another opportunity of this. He's like, well, I got to wrap it all up in all of this at the same time.
Yeah.
And that adds complexity because he did not leave Astonishing or Dead Souls or Multiple Man. Well, Multiple Man he left in a pretty decent spot, actually. But Astonishing or Dead Souls or, like, Secret Warriors with everything tied up perfectly.
No, and he's really trying to pull this stuff back together, but it doesn't seem to fit. We're telling very different kinds of stories here that don't seem to mesh. So we get this episodic quality to it where it's kind of villain of the week, right? Like, oh, it's the original Brotherhood, but it's Joseph. Why? I don't know.
It turns into multiple villains of the week, it makes it weird because it does feel like they're being told you have to have a fight in this comic now.
Yeah. Yep.
But it's a pointless fight that doesn't matter.
Yeah. But that's another thing that contributes to the goofy, like, quality of this, right? Like, there's this really, I do appreciate the dark sense of humor of Hope shooting Cyclops' eye out so that he is a literal Cyclops. That's funny.
That's funny.
That's funny.
That's a funny bit that he did that right? I think about a lot. Like, that's funny.
You can tell that he wants to have fun with Dark Beast. He wants to have fun with what he's doing.
He's trying to do the Dark Beast from his Secret Avengers.
Right.
Like, he's just trying to do that. He's trying to do all these different things, all within the shackles of the story he's been given.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a challenge. So much so that by the time we get to 16, like, here's the team. Here's the size of the team, by the way, by the end of this arc. It's Cyclops, Danny Moonstar, Wolverine, Havoc, multiple mans, including a Warlock multiple man.
Oh, right.
Chamber, Magic, Karma, Wolfsbane, Banshee, Hope Summers, and Kanan.
Right, Kanan comes back. Yeah, comes back at the end of this arc. And it's unclear whether some of the villains are part of the team or whether they're not. Like, Hope is their prisoner, but then she's not, and Kanan is their prisoner, but she's not. And, is Dark Beast helping or hurting? A little unclear.
The Kanan thing, by the way, super feels like they said we need to use Kanan.
Yeah. Does Juggernaut join the team in the first arc? Yeah, he joins at the end of the last issue of this arc. Right?
Oh yeah, that's right. Juggernaut also joins the team in this arc.
Yeah, because he's mad that Joseph fooled him.
It's too many characters, and Rosenberg is really interested in, like, 4 of them, but has to wrap up everything else, which it makes it for a hard book because it's a Cyclops and Wolverine book, and I get that every X-Men story is the same and every X-Men story is about these two dudes, but they hadn't had a story together in 10 years, so I'm gonna give them like one. But there's a lot of characters that don't get face time that they need. So much so that they start to leave. And in the weirdest thing to end this arc, Wolfsbane has decided that she's leaving the team. And then we end it with Danny Moonstar crying on the ground, screaming about how Wolfsbane is dead. And that is the end of this arc.
Yep, that's the cliffhanger. So why don't we pause, because obviously that's going to lead to a much larger conversation later. And let's try and rank this first half of Rosencanny. You want to tell people about our big old list?
We have a big old list. We're ranking all the X-Men stories from best to worst. That's it. We have 8. I'm sorry. No, we do a bit here. We have 850. You guys can tell we're not even to the part that me and Adam had to have a sidebar before the show. Was like, okay, how are we doing this?
We'll get there.
858 stories on this list, ranked from best to worst, with the best being Hoxpox, number 200 being Cable Blood and Metal, number 400 being Colossus God's Country, number 600 being Curse of the Mutants, that time that Cyclops told Dracula, I just want you to follow your heart. 800 is X-Man Messiah Complex. That's when he formed a band, or was in a band and wore a mesh shirt. That's great. And 858 is 2099 World of Tomorrow. It's the worst X-Men story of all time. This is better than 2099 World of Tomorrow. Worse than number 500 Generation Hope. The future is a 4-letter word.
Yeah, I'm looking down and I'm curious if this is a 500s or a 600 story. I just don't think it's successful in its tone and what it's trying to accomplish, like aside from the obvious of, yes, bumming the reader out, I think it's successful there, but it is
incredibly successful at bumming you out.
Yes.
Which was one of its goals.
Yeah.
So I'm giving it partial credit because it did what it wanted to do.
Sure. I just don't know that it really succeeds in terms of the even that as a central tone. It seems like all over the place, and the art just looks like crap. So
the art is so bad.
Yeah.
This is not as good as Astonishing X-Men Ghost Box at 588.
Nope. No, it is not. Is it
better or worse than an oddly comparable Nick Spencer's Ultimate Comics X-Men?
I would give the edge to Nick Spencer because I think that was still kind of messy, but I was very engaged with that.
I think it tells a similar story, but that one does more successful. A lot of that coming down to the artwork.
Yes, I would agree. So, all right, that's all the way down at 598. Below that is the Muir Island saga, which I think I would also, for all of its flaws, give the edge. I think we're in the 600s here.
I think we're in the 600s. 625 is Weapon X Force. That's the time that Sabretooth got... I don't know how do we describe Weapon X Force? They got good costumes, and then also... Azazel was there?
Is that the one where they fight in hell against the...
Yeah, where Reverend William Stryker has come back, and he is a Satanist now.
Oh, yeah.
A Satanist robot.
I think we're in the right spot. Rosenberg is trying something here. I want to at least, give credit for that. It's deeply unsuccessful. So
I think I know where to put it.
All right.
At 621 is the Daddy Boros issue of X Factor.
Mm-hmm.
Something that Matt Rosenberg, I think, would love.
It's a fun gimmick.
At 622 is Ultimate Comics X-Men 13 to 18, Divided We Stand, United We Fall, which is when the Nick Spencer X-Men stopped being written by Nick Spencer and then had to do the American Civil War too.
Yeah, that was where it gets real messy.
I think it goes right between those two. Because I do think this is better than the Paris arc of All New X-Men for its flaws.
I agree. So let's put this at 622. That is the This Is Forever arc of Uncanny X-Men Volume 5. Now, at least in terms of publishing, simultaneous to this, as we're getting into the last part of Rosenberg, War of the Realms crossover is happening company-wide at Marvel. So, of course, you have to have an X-Men tie-in to this. So we get this really kind of odd intermission in Rosenberg's arc with War of the Realms, Uncanny X-Men 1 to 3, which is still written by Rosenberg, but is illustrated by a much better artist, Pere Perez.
Yes. Now, here's the issue with this. War of the Realms, Uncanny X-Men is coming out monthly.
Mm-hmm.
Uncanny X-Men is coming out bi-monthly. War of the Realms, Uncanny X-Men chronologically takes place before Uncanny X-Men 16, which came out before this.
Yep.
And runs in parallel with this arc up until the last month of this arc, of the next arc. So, tonally, it's friggin' weird that this is coming out.
Yeah.
Because you have no idea how this 3-issue series fits.
Exactly, because we left off with the announcement and the cliffhanger that Rain died, right? And yet this story has her as a relatively central character. So War of the Realms, for people who didn't know what it was or ignored it, is basically kind of the culminating Asgardian story from Jason Aaron, where Malekith has summoned all of his Asgardian forces and is going to conquer Earth and all of the 9 realms.
Here's how I always think of Jason Aaron's Thor, Adam. It starts off with a banger of a 12-issue run.
Sure
Assad
does.
Ribic doing incredible art. It has that number 12 that is a great one-shot that really works. And then it goes into this Lord of the Rings story that no one really liked. And then the rest of the run is about that Lord of the Rings story that no one really liked, culminating in the War of the Realms.
And I feel like that's kind of the Secret Wars recipe that a lot of Marvel was like kind of shooting for, right? It's like, oh, well, we've got a big name writer. They've been doing a run on this series. Let's blow it out at the end with this like giant company crossover. And the problem with that is that if you do that every single time, it's not really all that exciting, especially when it's really just your regular Marvel heroes fighting against frost giants and, dark elves. Like that's not as exciting as another crossover could be.
It's not. And that's what this story is. It's the X-Men go to New York because Danny got summoned Valkyrie things. They go to New York City and they have to camp out and save all of New York by keeping them in City Field.
Okay. That is pretty funny. I do love that they hide in City Field and make that there's a couple of really clever things that happen in here. One is just like the continual obsessive use of Madrox by Rosenberg. I do have to appreciate that.
Dude loves Madrox.
Yeah,
so
and
much.
It's not just that it's an army of Madroxes. Because Hope is part of this story, you have an army of Hopes, because Hope is siphoning off Madrox's power and making dupes of herself. That kind of stuff is great. The main antagonist of this 3-issue series is not just these random frost giants and dark elves, but Sabretooth has been enlisted to lead a group of what are these ice dogs that are in this? I don't really
Hellhounds.
know.
They're the dark hounds of the hunt.
Cool.
Malekith is the lord of the hunt. He has dark dogs. Like that's a thing. He has dogs. Malekith has hunting dogs. This is Sabretooth literally months after being sent to hell to save his son and unreverting. He's like, anyway, now I'm Sabretooth again. I'm just going to be a jobber. Weird choice. I don't get that. What's weirder about this is who Sabretooth has kind of sort of teamed up with.
Well, he's working for, right? He's been assigned by
Hrimhari the Wolf Prince.
Yes,
and
from
also
Asgardian Wars.
Adam, I know you love Asgardian Wars, so know that I'm not talking about that when I'm about to say what I'm about to say.
Yeah, go ahead.
Has there ever been a good story with Hrimhari the Wolf Prince? Even in Asgardian Wars, arguably the weakest part.
I mean, he's just, a Claremontian crush for Wolfsbane, right? But ultimately what happens with Tyr in Peter David's X Factor really does.
Well, I can tell you there's never been a good story with Tyr in it.
Yeah.
Vita Ayala tried and dropped that one, said, actually, we're not going to get into the Tyr of it. I don't know why everybody. Go and reread those Peter David X Factor stuff. Go tell me that it's worth ever addressing again.
It's pretty rough stuff. So
that's what someone should send us Hell on Earth War. We'll get mean.
Oof. No, thank you. So what Hrimhari has done is essentially made
the
a deal with Hela that as long as Rain can stop fighting the bad guys, I guess, hey, just give up and come and live with us, then you can be back with your guy and your kid. And Rain's like,
did you know Hela was married at this time?
Oh, sure.
Do you know who she was married to?
No. Who's she married to?
Carnilla the Norn Queen.
Oh, okay. Cool. I didn't know that.
Most people just don't know about that. How
Not
Hela
brought up
is
in the
married to
story.
Carnilla the Norn Queen.
That's great. Good for Hela.
I don't
You know?
I don't know if it is a carnal relationship or if they have any romantic feelings for each other because it was kind of like a trick marriage, but they did go with it. So they are still
Cool.
married as far as I remember.
I have to imagine that if you're an eternal god that like never dies, things must get boring. You know, like you can only entertain yourselves
You
by
think their
tormenting
hats
this.
ever get stuck together? Because they both got complex hats.
I have to assume that they take them off at the end of the day, but who knows?
Who knows?
Who knows?
Anyway, Rain decides that like she knows that she can't do the stay with Rimari, the Wolf Prince, but it does. It adds context to how Rain dies later. It doesn't necessarily make it better, but it at least gives Rain a thing where previously she had no characterization in this run until then. And that's not for lack of Matt Rosenberg liking the character, because he obviously put her in Dead Souls and wrote her well there. But
Sure.
ugh.
I think what here's where it's helpful. It's helpful because it gives some context to why Rain would want to leave the X-Men, right? Which was happening in Uncanny that precedes Danny
And
saying that she died, right?
why
So
she'd be good with being like, you know what, actually I'm gonna do the Star Wars 3 thing.
yeah.
Why she has lost the will to live.
Oh, right. Yes. So
I don't want
the
to talk about these comics.
the downside to this story is that the thing that like you see Rain do very effectively in this story is go head to head with Sabretooth and kind of have him on the ropes. So when we go back to the story we're about to talk about in a moment, the death makes no sense because here she is
It's because she
absolutely
has lost the will to live because she doesn't have Rimhari the Wolf Prince in tier. I'm not saying it's a good reason. I'm saying that's textually the reason that is given.
so stupid. All right, so we'll get into that in just a second, but I do think that these three on their own are kind of fun. There's like, you know, Summers brothers with beards, there's fur coats, there's battle scenes on the streets of New York, and it doesn't have the same grim quality of the rest of the Rosenberg run. It allows him to have a bit more of the spirit that he did with Dead Souls or Multiple Man, even though it's like just basically one long battle scene for 3 issues, right? And he does get some kills in too, right? I believe Sunspot dies at the end of this.
Sunspot dies if Sunspot's death almost feels like a bit. Like
it really doesn't make sense.
Especially because we know about it in reading history. We know that he dies at some point, but we don't know how and when. And we are now deep into the Rosenberg run by the time he actually dies in the 3rd issue. Like, we're on like the second to last Uncanny issue, and he accidentally gets blown up by something.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
At that point, we had gone through the worst of it, and I just went around to laughing at that one. I was like, stupid. Everyone's dying.
It's like he's just throwing darts at a dartboard, right?
We forgot to mention earlier, Strong Guy and Loa also die. I think those are all the named X-Men that have died up to this point in the run.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the list grows, but, you know, a lot of it's still villains.
It's going to get worse before it gets better.
Yes,
to the point where it's going to get comically worse.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, darts in a dartboard.
By the last issue, it kind of turns around to, oh my gosh, it's just we're killing everybody now. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. So if we're talking about ranking this, I think this is better than the first part of Rosenberg's run for sure.
It has higher highs, it doesn't have as high of highs, but it doesn't have as low of lows.
Yeah,
it's my thought on it.
It's more like a medium grade thing. So I think we're probably in, I don't know, the 500s here. Like, is this better than Generation Hope?
Which Generation Hope?
The future is a 4-letter word, 1 to 4.
I don't think it's better than that. That's the one with no, I don't think it's better than that.
I don't think it's better than Death of X at 510.
No. Do we have any crossovers right around here?
Oh,
Uh,
let's see.
oh, I know where my line would be.
Okay.
Uncanny X-Men 401 to 406 X Corp.
Better or worse?
It's that one. I'd say better than this, better than Lord Darkwind, but maybe worse than Molly Fest Destiny at 520.
All right, that sounds like a good place for it. So this is going to be our new 521 War of Realms Uncanny X-Men 1 to 3. And now the moment no one has been waiting for.
Hey, folks, just so you know, this next part's going to have some frank discussions of violence against women and violence that has been interpreted by a lot of people and can easily be read as an allegory for violence against the trans community. So if you don't want to hear any of that, see you next week. We'll have more fun stuff. We're not doing anything super depressing that Zach's mad about reading next week.
Yeah.
We're talking about Man Thing next week. Next week's going to be fun.
It's going to be very silly. There is still some silly stuff in this this last arc here, folks, but
because if we don't laugh, we're going to cry.
Yeah.
And I don't cry about comics. It's just like there's some of this stuff is heavy and hard.
Yeah. So I think, the biggest reason that people have extremely negative feelings about the Rosenberg run, and appropriately so, is that it's not that he kills Rain. It's the fact that the way it's written on page is essentially a trans panic killing of the character. And you've talked to Rosenberg at the time afterwards. I've talked to him at Comic-Con. He's apologized publicly. I think it's very apparent that Rosenberg did not necessarily think through what the symbolism of what he was putting down on the page represented.
Mm-hmm.
Because for those who haven't read it, essentially how the scene plays out is that Rain is just relaxing on a park bench. A group of young men come over. One of them is flirting with her. And when they will not go away to her, rebuffs, she does partially transform into the wolf. And they're using the language of being fooled, right? That, now they're going to kill her. And the added weirdness of that issue of 17 is that that part is told in flashback while Wolverine exacts his revenge on this group of boys and also uses the phrase "say her name" and makes them say her name, which also conflates this story with the Black Lives Matter movement in a way that feels really unearned and strange. And, Rosenberg has talked about this a lot, that this is just not well thought out. And, he has apologized. And if there are folks out there that don't want to accept that apology, I think that's fair. I don't think he meant malice, but when you talk about artwork, you have to understand how it's received is just as, and in many cases more important than the intention of the artist. And there's not a lot of ways to look at it differently.
I had not read this since it first came out, and I think with time I had put in my head, you know what, maybe this isn't as bad or as blatant feeling as it was, as I remember it. And no, it is. And there's a great piece, and we'll link to it in the episode by a friend of the show and our friend Nola Fow from Women Write About Comics about this issue that can speak to this in a lot more detail than Adam and I reasonably can. But it's a rough read, and this is not a unique thing to Rosenberg. I mean, X-Men has historically used images of violence against a marginalized community to highlight the mutant metaphor, and part of it's to draw very direct parallels of, no, this is what we're talking about when we're saying, hey, these people are being hated and feared. Like Claremont does a lynching thing in God Loves Man Kills. Like, right. That's what it is. This is not the first time. This won't be the last time something like this happens. But there's a lot about this that feels charged and unearned and doesn't feel thoughtful. Which is surprising to me, because Rosenberg's generally a pretty thoughtful. Like I like him. I've talked to him. He's generally a pretty thoughtful guy. But this absolutely it is worse than you remember it. Especially even if you remember it as pretty bad, and that's a hard pill to swallow. And unfortunately, because this is the pivot point of the entire run, it leaves a bad taste in your mouth as you go through the rest of the stories.
Yeah, and it's especially strange because the rest of this story, after we get past the awfulness of this issue, is bonkers. It's actually very strange and borderline silly in the way that it goes about telling the rest of the story, because the rest of the arc centers around the idea that Emma Frost has erased herself from everybody's memory and is plotting this like huge overarching scheme to actually erase mutants from everybody's brains so that they don't even know that mutants exist. It's pretty wild. It's weird. It's strange. And so it's
at the same time, Adam,
yes,
you're not giving the amount of bonkersness that happens in this plot.
Yeah, please add to the bonkersness, because it is weirder than I'm even describing.
It's so weird, and this is too complicated of a story for the amount of time that is left in this book for 5 issues they have. It's too much, because what you have is you have Emma Frost doing that. She's working with Mystique to make this happen, but also she is being used as a pawn by the ONE and general generic bad guy. I don't know his name, and you don't know his name, and that's
no,
fine.
it's the same guy from Dead Souls.
That's a general generic bad guy.
Yes,
is who I like to call him.
Yes,
I'm trying to look up his. It's General Robert Callahan. So general generic bad guy.
Yeah,
he has captured Emma Frost, put a bomb in her brain, Suicide Squad style, and says he's going to kill her if she doesn't play ball with him. So Emma is double dealing on this. She is playing both sides against the middle. And then also at the same time, because we still have that pesky vaccine that's out there, and wouldn't you know it, Cyclops has been doing his own research, and he's just asking a lot of questions at him.
Cyclops is Aaron Rodgers. He's been on Facebook.
Oh my gosh, Aaron. It's really frustrating that the Packers have had 2 Hall of Fame first ballot quarterbacks that have gone off the deep end in surprisingly different ways. And I am really concerned about what happens with Jordan Love in 15 years and the ways that he is going to disappoint me.
Yeah.
As of this recording, the Packers have gotten the 7th seed in the playoffs and are going to will have played yesterday when this comes out, and hopefully won to go to the next round of the playoffs, though I do not find that likely.
Hey, you're talking to a Ravens fan, so I'm doing pretty good right now.
Gross. Anyway. At the same time, so Cyclops wants to get rid of this pesky vaccine. So he works with Dark Beast to make an anti-vaccine.
Sure does.
Which he then distributes via chemtrails that Banshee spreads across the globe.
Right. So kids get the vaccine.
This is all played incredibly straight. By the way.
And kids get the vaccine and then start like bleeding out. Right. So
and
like
dying.
And dying. So he's killing children.
He did Secret Warriors. He does the thing from Secret Warriors where Sinister made a person bomb.
Yep.
Child. Only it's played completely straight here. It's so weird. Anyway, Emma then succeeds. Oh, by the way, and General Generic Bad Guy is making Warlock Sentinels also at the same time.
Yep.
And Sinister is also involved.
So Emma has
Emma's
gone
plot.
to Mystique is there. She's been pretending to be Captain America to interact with the X-Men.
Mystique's been Captain America this whole time. That's funny.
Yeah, and Emma has taken the bomb out of her brain and introduces this idea that she's going to erase all of mutantdom from like human awareness. And this doesn't shake out the way she wants it to, because General Bozo has his own like Cerebro and he's got the Warlock Sentinels. And so we really get to this final issue where just people just start blowing up everywhere, left and right.
Let's
And
talk about after the Rain death. This is the list of characters who die by the end of this story. In the last 5 issues, Chamber, Dark Beast, Vanisher. Hold on, more people died. Chamber, Dark Beast, Vanisher. Oh, no one dies in this issue. Oh, Shinobi Shaw dies, but who cares?
right.
Banshee. Magic doesn't die, but somehow becomes 100% Darkchild for a while. Juggernaut gets the Crimson Gem of Sidorak ripped out from him. Madrox dies, and Havoc dies.
Mm-hmm.
Also, Fabian Cortez, who I forgot was in this. Oh, and Warlock dies.
Well, Emma is using Fabian Cortez to amplify her already powerful telepathy to accomplish her goals.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, people are just getting knocked off left and right until the magical return of the rest of the X-Men from the Age of X-Man. They arrive, they kick butt in like a page or two, and LaRocca comes back for the final issue, but obviously was pressed for time. So we get a couple of fill-in pages that look really bad. And
are we talking about the butt grab? Butt grab?
And then LaRocca is back after those couple of fill-in pages by I don't know who, and we get
David Messina, who I don't even want to judge his work based on these pages. They were very much we need a rush job. We need something that works.
That's a one day afternoon, like couple of pages right there. If I've ever seen him.
Which he does work in Glob Herman, so good for him.
Sure. But then we get the grand conclusion of this arc, which is the butt grab. And LaRocca has done some pretty interesting and questionable things art-wise. Female anatomy, there's a long storied history of good reasons to do objects coming out of a panel. I did think it was strange when he decided to have Emma Frost's boobs overlap the bottom of a panel earlier in the issue, or the last. I don't remember if it's this issue or the one before it, but the final moment of this story involves Jean Grey coming out of the ashes of the defeated ONE and falling into Scott's arms as Emma and Logan look away, and Cyclops' hand is pressing into Jean's butt.
It's a good fistful of tushy.
He's grabbing. He's very excited to see her. Folks, it's not good.
It's bad for the reasons we said earlier, and then it's just incompetently told by the end of this. Like, Rosenberg has too much story for the time allotted, and especially too much story to be well told by the creative team that he has working with him, because he has LaRocca. But then at the same time, he also has CF Villa, Carlos Gomez, and Bob Quinn working with him on fill-in stuff. But it is so rushed. We got to get this out every other week that no one is doing their best work.
No. And it ultimately is a failure as a story. If it's trying to tell this extremely, dark thing, the second arc of this, it has the title of We Have Always Been. And the punchline to this on the last page is that we have always been at war. And if the goal of this story was to really be this sort of dark, I just don't think it doesn't succeed. He's lost the readers well before this, and the number of goofy things that he's trying to overlap as he gets to the finish line in quick succession, he can't make it happen. It's not going to all get tied up in a tidy bow, and it is just going to be a mess. And I think that's highlighted even further because you get to the letters page and what's waiting for you? The cover of House of X #1.
What a beautiful thing. Because really what happened is we all turned the page and said, oh wait, next week everything's going to be something new's happening next week, and we don't know what. The thing about this run is that, yeah, by the next week, we were done. Heck, I think by the day this came out, also came out a preview of, like, House of X and Powers of 10. So we were all like, oh, no, we're doing this now.
Right.
And that's unfortunate, because I think there are some ideas here that could be interesting, but then just aren't.
I think under the right circumstances, if you gave Rosenberg a different edict and asked him to do different kinds of stories that were maybe a little bit more aligned with what he was doing with his minis, there could be more fun here, you know? Unfortunately, if the edict is do the darkest thing you can so that when we come back, everybody is super psyched. I mean, it's set up to be the antithesis of what we're about to get with Hickman. So, of course, in contrast, it's going to be bad, you know, and it's even on its own merits, it's just not good. So I think this is definitely.
I want to leave one last thing, and this is probably the worst thing I can say about this. You know how they wanted us to be so like, oh, this is depressed and upset, and like knowing that House of X was coming.
Yeah.
It's the most freaking manipulative Marvel Comics stuff they always do. You see it the most right now with the Spider-Man people, and that just may be because Spider-Man people are loud. But it's like, hey, look, we're going to sell you stuff based on fear and anxiety of what's going to happen instead of getting you invested in the stories. And it's manipulative, and I hate it, and I hate more that it works. Because end of the day, if the goal was to get the catharsis of House of X and get everyone hyped about that new thing, well, look, it worked.
It sure did.
Dark and terrible. And it also worked, and I hate it.
Yeah, it's definitely manipulative. So I think this is the worst that we've talked about today. I would go so far as to say we're probably in the 800s here.
You think this is worse than Brotherhood at 770? Because that's where my mind jumped to.
770 Brotherhood 129. Yeah, I do. I do think this is worse.
Okay.
I think, I don't know, Onslaught's at 779. I mean, we're really getting into
I'm actually going to, right now, 800. You highlighted this. I don't know intentionally or not, but Uncanny X-Men 500 to 503 SFX.
Yes.
A weirdly comparable story that involves a lot of abuse and violence towards a young, innocent female character, and also with some of the trash worst art you've ever seen.
Yeah, that's some really bad Greg Land stuff. So it's comparable for sure. I just think that this one really did something that hurt people. And I think that is worthy of consideration as part of this. So, you know, like I look down at like 811 Mojo Worldwide. Is it bad? Is it terrible? Yeah, but it's also just like a nothing, you know, whereas this, like, in its attempt to try something, has really gone off the rails in a very bad way.
I think I have the place, Adam.
Yeah, go for it.
I think you'll hear this and agree. I would put it below X Factor 39 to 40 Multiple Birth. And that's at 829 right now.
Yes.
And right above Uncanny X-Men 508 to 511 Sisterhood.
I think that's a good place for this, and now we don't have to talk about it anymore. So this is going to be our new 830, the second half of Uncanny. Wow, that was a challenge.
Me and Adam normally don't like have to pregame on a podcast to be like, okay, how are we doing this one? Normally we're just riding it loosey goosey. This one we had to be like, okay, wait, hold on, let's huddle, let's make sure we are saying the right thing.
What's
we
our
know
approach?
What we want to say on this. It turns out maybe we should prepare for podcasts more often.
You know what?
Maybe that's not even a crazy, unreasonable thing to like sit down and prepare for an hour of talking.
Who has time for that, Zach? Come on.
Who has the time? That's true. If I can't prepare for half of my meetings, I'm sure not going to prepare for this. I'm kidding. I prepare so much for my meetings. It's insane.
So despite these the choice of story, we do want to thank our our patron again for the challenge. You know, I appreciate a good challenge.
I don't. I no longer need challenge. I have enough challenge in my life. This is my fun X-Men podcast. I think Riley Gillard appreciate being a patron and doing fun stuff. And I also appreciate how next week we get to talk about Man-Thing.
Yes. So next week we are talking about that swamp man nexus of all realities guy from Daydreamers. So that'll be exciting.
X-Men character Man-Thing. That'll be great. Adam, anything you want the people to know about?
Nah, just follow on socials, Adam Reck on Blue Sky and Instagram, and Arthur Stacy on Twitter, and that's about it.
Okay. I don't have anything either.
All right, you gotta say the bit.
Oh yeah. Sorry. This has been forever, so I'm
since last week.
Folks, this has been Battle of the Atom. We hope you survived the experience. I'm not sure we did.
Get it!